You're listening to In Sickness, a podcast about caregiving with Allison Breininger and Justin Bima.
Good morning.
Good morning, Allison. How's everything going over there?
Let's see. I feel like I have been sort of living our last topic lately. So our last topic was the whole play it safe versus YOLO, right?
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so that has just kind of continued because we are deep in that conversation around the trip. Remember last time I talked about how first we were going to go to Scotland for my daughter's graduation trip. And then we were like, or maybe we can just go to Wisconsin.
Right.
I mean, it's the Scotland of something.
Is it?
Nope. Certainly
Okay.
isn't. Nope. So we did present that to her. And then she was like, well, what about New Orleans?
Okay.
And then we're like, okay, that's cool. But in the summer, it's very hot.
Yeah.
And then we had a hot minute of being like, let's go to New Orleans for spring break. And then we're like, no, that's next week.
Right.
So it's just been I've been spending a lot of brain space on this topic and trying to figure out, is there a good compromise?
Right.
And I think something that I have realized is just the grief involved in this whole process of is this the new reality?
Right.
Does this mean if we don't go on this trip, we're never going to go on a trip? And I don't say that to be dramatic, but just to be I don't know that the stamina levels are ever going to be more than they are right now.
Yeah.
Right. And so if I say we're not going to go on this trip because you don't have enough stamina, is that just sort of saying well,
right.
trips are over. And so, and just thinking oh, I wish that we had known that. I don't know. I don't know. So just sort of balancing all of the people have said, well, you don't have to do this trip for her. I'm no, I know we don't.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that we put it out there and said the three of us or the four of us, including my mom, are going to go on this trip. And so if we suddenly were well, we're going to go, but dad can't go, that would be very sad.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, just still sort of digging into that whole thing and processing more and more about all of that. And do you make the memories? But then what if the memories are terrible? you know?
Right. Yeah.
So that's kind of where we are. Hopefully by the next time we record, we'll have landed somewhere on that.
Okay.
But I just have been spending a lot of time on that. So I'm excited actually that tonight is our support group on that topic.
Oh, good.
And so I'm actually looking forward to processing more with our support group buddies. So
good.
It's kind of where I am these days in my head a little bit about all that, but nothing acutely going on, which is
okay.
Nice.
Yeah.
So we'll take it.
We will take that for sure.
What about you? What's going on over there?
Well, spring feels like it is definitely here, which is wonderful.
Happy for you.
The sun is coming up and it's kind of in my eyes, but I don't mind because it's the sun.
Take it in.
We've got flowers coming up in the yard.
Oh, nice.
It just feels like after the darkness of winter to be okay, we made it.
Yeah.
Things feel, I don't know, lighter in some ways. It's just, it's a nice time of year.
Yeah.
Feeling excited about that.
Good.
Which is nice.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Whereas we're getting a quote mega snowstorm today.
Lovely.
So we're not quite there yet, but we'll catch up at some point.
Right. But yeah, so, and then in general, as I've mentioned for a while, from a caregiving perspective, things are pretty good.
Yeah.
Sarah's been doing, overall, certainly so much better than she was even, I don't know, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Which has been fantastic. And so there hasn't been nearly the level of active caregiving that I've been doing. And in some ways, it plays out in your mind well, okay, am I actually still a caregiver? Because I'm not really doing that kind of stuff that much. And one, I don't know that that's a super important question to get a firm answer on.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just kind of something that I've kind of been reflecting on a little bit. And so I know that for other people, the level of caregiving responsibilities can ebb and flow. And I also want to be sensitive to the fact that there are lots of caregivers who that is not the case. And that today talking about a little bit of what it's like when things are not crazy, when things are overall pretty good. Like, I just want to be sensitive to the fact that, we have a number of listeners who that feels out of reach for them. And so I just want to be upfront about that.
Yeah.
At the top here.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you saying that. Cause I think in some ways I'm one of those people, right? And I think there are some people where it's only just going to get like they're in the trenches and the trenches are just going to get deeper. Right.
Yeah.
I think in some ways, you thought that 3 years ago, if 3 years ago you would have said that you would be having this conversation, you would have been like, absolutely not. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, for sure.
So I'm not trying to like bright side and say like, don't worry, you all, like maybe someday. Yeah. Right. But I think part of it is we just don't know.
True.
And some of us do know that it's probably only just going to get worse. So I appreciate that. And I think that each of us has this in our own way. Like you've maybe had a stretch of, I don't know what you would say, 6 months, a year of quiet.
Yeah.
Whereas some people it's like, today was a good day. Like,
right.
And so I think we each have on some level these moments, whether it's a day or a year of like, does it really count? Am I still a caregiver? And I think I hear this from caregivers all the time. So I wonder if like one place to start is even to say, like, because you said, do I still get to call myself a caregiver? Is to like kind of go back to some previous conversations we've had and ask, like, what's the benefit of claiming the title of caregiver? Like, why should we? How does that help? Just because otherwise it's sort of like, well, why do we care if we're calling ourselves a caregiver or not? So when you think about that, like, what do you think are the benefits? Like, why would you want to call yourself a caregiver? Or what's good about that?
Right. I think for me, it feels like the benefit of that is primarily in the early stages of the caregiving journey of this stuff is all happening. And then reaching that point where like, okay, I am a caregiver, acknowledging this role that you're in.
Yeah.
Because then you can, it opens up this like, okay, I'm in this role. I'm a caregiver. I can be supported sort of, or like,
okay,
leading to like, okay, there are resources for me.
Yes.
There are other people in this situation. Like it gives you a label to what you're going through.
Yeah.
And then with that label, you can, learn, search for, hear other experiences. Like it's a connection.
Yeah.
It's that, suddenly you're, okay, I am part of this club.
Yeah.
And get to know other members kind of thing, or, that. So that's kind of what I think the main thing of that is. So it doesn't feel like right now super important for me to to have a clear answer to, okay, right now I am not a caregiver. And I don't think that's true. Like I still, I weekly do the pills and I, am with Sarah for a lot of her medical appointments. And, even though things overall have been much, much better, since, I don't know, late fall, I mean, she's had a significant dip in her energy to where, late summer, she was walking around the block in the evening with me and Mosey, and she hasn't been able to do that for a long time now.
Okay. Yeah.
But still, it's her energy window right now is shrunk some, but overall things are quiet.
Yeah.
As you said.
Sure. Well, it feels also relative, right?
True.
So let's think about this. Like if, a next door neighbor of yours, right, a couple in their 40s was like, my spouse suddenly doesn't have the energy to walk around the block. That would be like a crisis mode for them.
True.
And they would be like, I am absolutely a caregiver because my wife can't walk around the block.
Right.
And I need to, my life looks different because of that. But for you, like, she's still doing a billion times better than she was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And so in relation to that, it feels like, oh, great.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one way to think about it is it just feels better than your crisis mode.
Right.
But it still is more significant than the couple next door.
Right.
That makes sense?
Yeah, that does. I think another dynamic that's been happening is over the past, 6 months or so, maybe she hasn't had as much of the physical energy, but like mentally she's been able to take on more. And so there's been this sort of like offloading of some of the stuff that I've been doing for years and years and years, that she's like wanting to take back or take some of that stuff off of my plate to share the load a little bit more. And that's been wonderful.
Yeah.
For both of us, because for her, she's able to like feel like she's contributing more and more of part of things. And for me, it's like, okay, I can not have to hold this thing and be the sole person that feels like they're responsible for this. And so I think it's with things moving in that direction that it feels like caregiver doesn't quite fit as much. Mm-hmm. It feels more like we are living with her chronic illness and kind of just working within the envelopes of that energy, more than me being an active caregiver. And I will say it feels sometimes strange to come on here and talk about caregiving when I like don't always feel like that is my life. But I have to remember that it has been my life.
Right.
And so, it's not, things change. Things are not always the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm never going to just like boot you off and be like, no fear there. Suddenly I'll just be like, you're not actively caregiving enough. So welcome Brian, our new co-host to the show, because, so no, not going to happen. Because I think you bring up a really important point that even if in this moment of time, your daily activities don't seem like as heavily caregiving, you have been through it.
Right.
And that forever changes you, right? That is in you and who you are. The support group is for, I say it's for current and former caregivers. And when I said that, I was sort of thinking of people whose person has passed, right? But I had someone once who said, thank you so much for saying that, because I feel like I'm not currently a caregiver because my husband is stable.
Right.
So I consider myself, and so I didn't even know if I was allowed to come to the support group.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my goodness. I mean, it's open, right? It's like, if caregiving has been in your life, come on over, right?
Right.
But it was sort of this, like you said, when you claim the title, that means the things you listed, you said, I can be supported. I get access to resources. I get to be part of this group of other people. And I think sometimes it can feel like, oh, well, I'm not actively in it as much right now. Therefore, do I count? Do I get to be in the group? Do I get to, participate in these resources? And I think in some ways, and I'm curious to see if this has happened for you, but I've heard from some folks that like it's in those quiet seasons that we finally get to process all the stuff we went through. And that's what this person had said. And even some of the like widows and widowers who have come to our support group have said, like, I couldn't process these topics when I was in it, but I can process them more now because I'm outside of it.
Right.
And so I think that sometimes we're not actively doing it, but then we're able to get into it a little bit more because we have that like sort of retrospect, I suppose, of looking back instead of just being in the go mode,
Yeah, that's a really good point. Something I hadn't thought about that as much, but you're absolutely right that when things are intense, like we are in survival mode. We are there's no space, time, mental energy to process what's happening. So yeah, I think that's been something that's been happening with me for longer than, I don't know, a year, maybe. I don't know what the timeline is, but yeah, there is more. You think back and there's grief that comes up, and because you really think about when things are better, like, wow, things were not great for a long time. And you see the things that you can do now and realize how much you missed them when you couldn't have that. And so there is that piece for sure of like, it gives you space to have some grief. It gives you space to like think through what all happened and kind of, have time to feel some of those things for sure.
Yeah. Do you ever, like, in this quiet moment that you're in, is fear or worry or anxiety in the back of your head of like, this could change at any moment? Like, we could go back to where we were before. You know what I mean? Is that there? And if it wasn't, I hope I didn't just plant a seed. I apologize.
No, you did not. You did not plant a seed that was not already there. And that is a thing. It hasn't been an overwhelming, looming feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But every time that, you know, we went to a family dinner last weekend,
mm-hmm.
and it wiped Sarah out this week.
Yeah.
And so every time we do something and she like just crashes,
Mm-hmm.
and these days that primarily is just like she has to sleep a lot.
Yeah.
To recover from that. And it's like you feel that swing back in that other direction. And it brings back some of what things used to be like.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, you have to remember that these days there have been those swings back, and it's come back to it. The pendulum has swung back the other way, certainly much more quickly than, it used to.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that recent experience of knowing that when things take a dip, it's not this intense dip, but there is always that sense that, like, especially not feeling like we have a clear a single thing to point to that's like,
right.
Okay, this is why she's doing better.
Right.
That something could happen that just really makes things go back the other way.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no guarantee that that's never not going to happen again.
Right. Right.
And that's like, you don't want to dwell on that, but it also gives you, I think, some of the perspective to, like we talked about last week on like playing it safe versus like, let's go live. Like, it makes you want to like take advantage
right
of the days when there is good. And I mean, yeah, so when there's a day now that Sarah has the energy, we might go out and do something more so than we used to, just because, like, okay, we're in this season and we don't know. So let's make the most of this season.
Yeah. It's making me think of, like, we, a couple of years ago, we were pre-COVID, Sean was ending up in the ER all the time.
Right.
And with these UTIs. But then they came up with this like great system of antibiotics. And then that didn't happen for a long time. So then in January, I think it was, when suddenly we ended up back in the ER.
Right.
It was this like, oh yeah. Oh, I remember this. And since then now it's sort of like that fear of that occurrence is like resurfaced. Whereas for a while I was like, oh, it wasn't even on my radar anymore.
Yeah.
But now it's more like, oh, are we going to read that? Oh, is this going to happen? Oh, and so even in those, like, you have the quiet moments, but then you have these like reminders of the non-quiet moments that kind of like pluck you out of the quiet moment, because it's like, this might happen. I'm speaking for myself, but I would guess that, you and I in our anxious brains, might share some of those things, Yeah.
For sure.
And I think it makes us, I always say that this life that I've lived has, like, the more hard things I experience, the more it sort of like increases my level of joy on the other end. Because I think you probably saw that yesterday morning, I got to go to this like garden store, and they were puppies that you got to,
like, what a magical thing.
Oh my gosh. And then my little twin nieces were there. I mean, it just was like the best. And so it's like moments like that I'm like, look at this moment.
Yeah.
That I appreciate so much more because of all the hard things. Whereas, I mean, somebody else might be like, yeah, cool, that was fun. But I'm like, no. Do you understand how great this was? So I think that if in these quiet seasons, if we can, like, get those little voices of like, it might come back, it might, to not be so loud, so that we are able to enjoy the fact that there's a quiet season, whether that quiet season is for an hour or a year or like the rest of our lives, to appreciate that, that we have that, and to realize that doesn't discredit all that we've gone through.
Right.
I don't know if it's like once a caregiver, always a caregiver. I don't know. But, like, if you've gone through it, it's not just because you're in a quiet moment doesn't mean that like title goes away,
I think it does flip a switch in your brain. At least that's been my experience, is that like going through caregiving for me has changed me.
Yeah.
I feel like I see the world differently. I see other people's hardships differently.
Yeah.
It just has given me a different perspective that I think will always be there. And I think, I guess I don't know, grateful for that, but also like, I'm glad that I had to become a caregiver because I have this perspective. Like if I could go back, if I could go back and say, choose between, okay, now I have been a caregiver and now I have this perspective versus not ever having to have gone through with Sarah what we went through. I mean, I still would rather not go through that.
Of course. Yeah.
But it is something that has come out of it, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I think that it does change some of how you see the world, how you're wired, some of that stuff.
Yeah.
I think another thing with these quieter seasons or calmer moments is managing expectations.
Okay.
Or it's like she's having a good day, but that doesn't mean she's better.
Yeah.
Like,
are you saying the managing expectations of the public, like of the world?
Yes.
More so than you, right?
Yes. Like, she still has a chronic illness.
Yeah.
She still has limitations on her energy. And so she still can't do everything she could before she got sick.
Yeah.
She still might have to cancel something because she just doesn't have the energy for it.
Yeah.
Like, we're living in a different reality now.
Mm-hmm.
And from our perspective, it feels like night and day from where we were. But like you mentioned earlier, when I talked about not being able to walk around the block, like, that feels like that's not a shocking thing for me to say and think about, that like she was able to walk around the block and now she is not.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for a lot of people, that would be like, whoa, like, what is happening here?
Right.
So there is certainly a vastly different perspective that of life between, us living with her chronic illness versus, people who are not in that stage of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so just because she can go out to dinner and like maybe me and her were able to go out to dinner, have a wonderful night out, like someone hearing that, like it's a tough balance because you want to be like, yes, we were able to do this wonderful thing and celebrate that.
Right.
But also in the back of your mind, you're like, you don't want to give the impression that is now your always reality.
Yep.
And so there's that tension or something.
Well, it's like when we went to the John Batiste concert,
right? Yeah.
And I posted about it, but I said in there, like, here's what was hard about it. And that, he was there and he was holding onto a walker, and then I felt kind of bad because he posted about it and was like, this was the most wonderful, life-changing experience, And I was like, because I know I look like I'm Debbie Downer, but I think, I want people to understand that, yes, this great thing happened. And it was surrounded in sort of angst for me, at least. And it wasn't just like if, next door neighbor friends are like, I'm going to a concert, right? It's just a really different situation.
Right.
And so I think painting that picture for folks, so that they don't say, oh, great, well, we're going to a concert next week. You want to come with us?
Yeah.
Like, oh, no. That's not how this works. I'm thinking about, way back in the beginning, we talked a lot about like our backpacks full of rocks.
Right. Yeah.
And we talked about that for a while, but basically that each rock symbolized a hard thing that we were dealing with. Right. And so I'm thinking about how for you in this moment, there aren't as many like logistical, like you used to like hook her up to like an IV or like a banana bag and do all these sort of like these things. And so there's fewer maybe logistical daily things, right? That rock is gone or smaller or whatever. But I think that as long as our people are here with us, like we still have this huge mental and emotional rock in our backpack of like probably the time you spend like thinking about or, worrying or whatever. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to put words into your mouth, but I would imagine that you're still thinking like, oh man, we're going out to this dinner. How is that going to impact her? Oh, this, you know what I mean? Like, or you're still having the feelings about it. And so even if I think that we put too much weight on the logistics and thinking like, oh, my daily tasks have decreased.
Right.
As a caregiver in the last year. Therefore, maybe I'm not a caregiver anymore. Whereas it's like, that's only one rock in the backpack, y'all. like the amount of like mental energy and emotional energy you spend caring for and thinking about your wife is still large, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't mean to put words in your mouth. So tell me how that landed with you.
No, that's a piece I hadn't like specifically thought about, but you're right that if we're leaving the house, it is always on my mind. Does she have the energy for this? What is the aftermath of this, exerting this energy, using this energy going to be? If we're going somewhere, are we going to have to leave early because she's crashing? Yeah, and there's a piece of grief associated with that, that we can't just go to a thing and not worry. That we can't just, and that's another rock.
Yes.
That we can't still live a quote unquote normal life, whatever that is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that we too often, I think, just imagine like just because you're doing fewer things,
right,
you're not doing it, but your backpack is still heavy. It's still full of all these other things. And like I said, there might be moments in this season where some of those, like the grief rock, might actually be like, whew, I got room to breathe in this backpack because that logistical rock is out of here. And it's like, it's like kind of like if we go, I'm using a lot of analogies today, but if we go to the boardroom, right?
Yeah, right.
And now suddenly the logistical board member is like quiet. And so then grief is like, hey, my turn, and maybe like reflection or like things that are like, have space to breathe and make themselves known, which is all still very much caregiver life. Yeah. Even if you're doing fewer logistical things.
Right. And I think that's part of what I was talking about when a switch flips when you become a caregiver. Yeah. Like it turns on, I think, that some of that part of your brain. Yeah. And those pieces that don't necessarily just turn off and shouldn't necessarily just turn off because we're not living the life we lived before.
Right.
We are living a different life. We are on a different trajectory. And those are things we have to consider is, how much energy does Sarah have managing that? What can we actually get done in a week? All of that kind of stuff. What does it mean for us to have the equivalent of a vacation? Because, traveling is still not something that she's really able to do.
Yeah.
So how can we have some level of that kind of experience without leaving the house or leaving town?
Yeah.
And sometimes, I've had times where I just take a week off of work and we can just hang out all week.
Yeah.
To kind of like, that's, I don't know, I guess a vacation for us in some ways.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So yeah, I think that there's this piece, and I hope I'm not being like super Debbie Downer here.
No.
But I think that there's this piece about like, okay, it's a quiet season, so you're not in emergency mode. But that in some ways makes it, in my experience, even more apparent how our normal is different from other people's normal.
Right.
Because if we're in like emergent, like clearly that's different from other people.
Yeah, right.
But if we're back to sort of like, just kind of quiet medically, however, like your person can't walk around the block, my person can't walk around the block. You know what I mean? Like that's a normal day. And so then normal versus somebody else's normal, it becomes even more apparent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Because when things are intense, it's like, obviously,
right, what
I'm going through is so different than my neighbors.
Yes.
But when you are not in that intensity, when it is whatever your baseline looks like, it is very apparent to us how different those baselines are. And you feel more, wow, we are living a different life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask, and you can edit this out later if you don't want to.
Okay.
But I sense a little bit of a shift in you in this last few minutes. Has this kind of hit you? Or am I misreading?
No, I think I'm just having more perspective or reflection on the whole piece about our baseline, kind of that, like that difference between where we are, this trajectory that we're on, how that is different than the quote unquote normal. And I think that still sometimes in my mind, I'm like, I can't wait for things to be back to how they used to be, or like wishing that things could go back, or like feeling like there's still a way to that. And I don't think there is.
Right.
At least not right now. There's not an option there. And so it's just, thinking about how, because we've got a lot of life ahead of us yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that all signs currently point to that, the rest of that life being very different from a lot of our peers.
Yeah.
And it's one thing, like right now, it feels so good to be in such a better place than we were 2-3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But how is that going to feel to be living still in the place we are now 20 years from now?
Right.
And will, though, like the excitement of how things are now wear off?
Right.
And how that's going to go. So, yeah. I don't think about that a lot, but thinking about that now.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, I think that, it's this baseline comparison thing that to us, this is like, wow, best season ever. But then if we step back for a minute and think like, whoa, our best season looks like somebody else's worst possible season. And not to let that diminish our good season, but just there's a weight to that, and a little bit of like that feels hard. And back to the comparison conversation, like that's
Yeah. I was thinking of comparison going into this topic, and thinking about the side of it where you are comparing yourself to other people going through caregiving in a good season, and how that feels like you're not really in it. But in this last 5 minutes, thinking about, I hadn't thought about the comparison piece between, where we are versus where our peers are.
Yeah.
And it's not like, our good season is not the same. We're not, and for some people it may be, the person they're caring for may, whether it's going into remission, or there is some sort of treatment or cure or healing from an injury, you might go back to that. But for a lot of us, even though things are better, things are not perfect. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think our backpacks are heavy enough. And so I think that one thing that we should not put in our backpack is some sort of like imposter syndrome.
Right.
Rock.
Yeah.
I think that this community of caregivers, we are all welcoming and loving, and you know what I mean? And so I think caregivers don't ever take one little second to stop and think like, well, they have it worse than I do, therefore I don't count. Or they have it worse than I do, therefore I shouldn't go to this thing, or shouldn't get access to that. Nope. We're all in it. It's all hard. We all got our backpacks with our stuff in it. And I hate that sometimes like my situation is so extreme that I think that people sometimes use that as an example and are like, well, mine's nothing like yours. Well, I'm glad that yours is nothing like mine. And that doesn't mean it's not hard in a different way. So even like what the conversation I started with today about like this trip, like, in your house, you wouldn't even be having this conversation.
Right.
So that's one end of the spectrum. And then we're somewhere in the middle of like, this is a good idea. And then there's some people who can just like run out the door right now and jump on a plane. And so there's this whole spectrum. And I think that like caregivers, let's not spend 1 ounce of our energy comparing or worrying if we fit in or if we still count, or no, like you're in the club. Sorry about that, but you are, and you're here forever. So, and I think, I just said 1 ounce of energy. And I think that's another thing I want to just like touch on too, is that I keep thinking about how last time we were together, I said something about like, sometimes I feel like I have a chronic illness. And I think that it's because like I have gone through so much and continue to go through so much, and so much energy in my body is spent every day thinking and processing and worrying and swirling and, multitasking and all of that. So I feel like my actual body and well-being like is not as healthy. Right. And does not have the stamina of, what I would have otherwise potentially. Right.
Yeah.
Or of my peers.
Right.
And so I think that's a part of it too, is when we start to think about supporters and help, is that even if we're in a quote quiet season, like I am more tired than I would be otherwise if I wasn't a caregiver. Right. And so I still need and deserve support. And so even if my week isn't full of a bunch of doctor's appointments, I still don't have the energy that I wish I had. And I still don't have, like, I've been thinking like my garage is like the hottest mess. And I keep thinking I really need to clean out this garage. And like, there's zero possibility that Sean can help me with that. Right. And so like in a quote, typical couple situation, like maybe that would be the thing that you both go out there and do it.
Yeah. Right.
And so I keep thinking like, can I ask for help from people? But are they going to be like, what's your problem? He's not in the hospital. You know what I mean? Like, and so I just think that that's another piece of it as we think about even like asking for help and receiving help in the quiet seasons, is that like I'll speak for myself. I am beat down, run down from the years of this. And so even if nothing is acutely happening in this moment, I still need extra support and help. Even if today I feel great, next week something might come up again. And so I sort of feel like when there are good moments, I need to be like storing up my energy in preparation for what might be coming next.
Right.
But I think that I might feel like people might be like, oh, look, they're doing great over there. I'm not going to offer a meal or whatever. Like you can always offer help. Like it's always going to be a benefit. And in some ways it even feels more beautiful in these like quote off seasons.
Yeah.
Because it just shows that you're still thinking of us and that like we're still in it. Even if we're not like as like in it in the moment.
Yeah.
That we still need extra love and support.
Right. Absolutely. I think too, when we talk about supporting caregivers and when people think about how they support people in their lives that are going through hard times, so often it is the logistical side of things.
Yeah.
It is taking tasks off of the caregiver's plate. It is, making it so they have less stuff to do. And, in a place like where I am right now, that's not necessarily something that I need help with. Not that it wouldn't be appreciated for someone to be like, hey, can we make a meal for you? Like that would still be very much appreciated. Like even if Sarah wasn't sick, like that's a cool thing to do for somebody else.
Yeah.
Just, but you can support someone in the non-logistical ways too. And we talk about that as well, but whether that's verbally acknowledging to someone that you see that their baseline is not the baseline of their peers. You see that their life, even though things are quiet, is just different, that they are on a different path. Being available to help them process the loss, the grief, the years of fatigue, whatever it is that they've been through, and being available for that.
Yeah.
Kind of helping them with, as you said, the emotional piece that kind of may still be very present, even though the logistical piece is not.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder even about offering like, hey, you want to go grab a coffee? Do you want to take a walk? Knowing that potentially it's a season in which that's more available to them.
Right. Yeah.
And still saying like, and if not, no problem.
Right. Absolutely.
But just because like, I would imagine that in a lot of cases, people have like stopped asking, can you do it? Can you want to do it? Right. Because they sort of like, they always have to say no. But then, so keep asking, right? Because there might be a day, like yesterday, I got to like run to the garden store with my friends, right? And like a lot of weeks, that's not the case.
Yeah.
But there was a moment and it worked and it was beautiful and felt like, yes, I did it,
Right.
And so to still offer those opportunities with the out, right? Just,
right.
But just to say like, hey, I was just wondering if you want to do this thing. Because it might feel really good to have an opportunity to do that in this kind of off season.
And I certainly feel that in this season, it has been a time to reconnect with people that, due to Sarah's illness, due to the pandemic, like not seeing people, not being connected to people, that isolation. And so when things are in this quieter season, to have people reach out to spend time with, whether that's me, whether that's someone reaching out to spend time with Sarah, or both of us, that spending that quality time, like that's a form of support.
For sure.
Yeah. And you're right that these seasons are a great time for that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I keep thinking about, we have this amazing, I've probably mentioned her before, but she's lives just a couple blocks away, and her daughter had Fanconi anemia. And so we just have, gotten to know her over the years. And she's the one that will just put like a bag of Lay's potato chips in the front door because she knows that's my favorite. But she, even more often than that, all of a sudden, like just bloop, like our mailbox is like in our front door. Like something comes like flying through the door. And it's just like a little card. And there's often like a gift card to this lovely ice cream shop nearby. And in the card, it always says like, no need to acknowledge this. And sometimes there's like a little something for us and a little something for our daughter. And it's just like, but she often does it on off seasons.
Right.
And that's what I just really love about it. Is that it's just like, oh, she's thinking about us. And she's not just thinking about us because she saw like, oh, they're in the hospital. No, she's thinking about us on an off day.
Right.
And that feels so lovely.
It does.
And beautiful to be like, oh yeah, thank you. You get it. Thank you. So I think that's the kind of thing, is like, how can you have, like, who can you think about today who's listening, people who are listening, of like somebody who's like not in the trenches at this moment, but like still lives there,
Yeah.
that you can just like text, send a card to. And I hate to say that if you're like the caregiver, because you got enough going on. So supporters.
Yeah.
To think about how to send something, just like thinking of you, anything else in addition to what supporters can do than what we've already talked about?
The only other thing that I was thinking about was how celebration fits into this, in the sense of like, I think due to the comparison piece and like comparing, like for myself in a quiet season, seeing how other caregivers are not, like hesitant to openly like celebrate where we're at.
Yeah.
In sense of like trying to be sensitive there, or I don't know, that kind of thing. But like acknowledging that being in a quiet time is something to celebrate.
Yeah.
Even though it may not be permanent, that things can change, even though things aren't perfect, giving yourself permission, taking the time to celebrate that where you are at. And that is okay, that is normal, that is healthy, that is a great thing that you can do with your person. Is just be really thankful for where you're at and where you've gotten to.
And again, that might be an hour.
Right. Yeah.
That might be like, this is a good hour. Right. Like that might be the season you're in, or it might be this is a week, or this has been 6 months or whatever.
Yeah.
So one thing for supporters is, if you hear someone celebrating, to just be careful about your response and not be like, yay, cured, great. You know what I mean? And so to be sensitive about that. But absolutely. I mean, I think like last summer when we went on this cruise with my family, I was like, do I even post about this? Because I know so many caregivers can't leave the house, let alone go on a cruise, but then I did, and people were like, no, I'm so glad you did, because like for some people, they're like, it gave us hope, or like, we love to see that you're actually able to do something. And, and so I think we're like this beautiful team of community as caregivers. And so like we want to celebrate with each other. I mean, I would much rather see like my fellow caregiver people, like they get to go on this amazing spring break trip and it went well, than like my healthy friends going on a spring break. Like that feels a little hard sometimes, to be like their life is just super different and they can just hop on the plane. But like to see somebody who I know is like in it, and that's a really big deal that they got to do this, like makes my heart happy,
Yeah. And I think that the caregivers that and this is, I think, is an advantage to having a community of other caregivers that you are a part of. Yeah. They can see what the outside world might see as a little thing. They know that that's a big thing, and they can celebrate that with you. Yes. And I know for me, like I see things going on in your life that I'm like, I'm so glad. I'm so happy. That's fantastic that you get to do that.
Yes.
Because like, I know that is not what a stretch that is, or what a big deal something like that is. And so I guess as for supporters, try to take some of that perspective and understand that what looks like maybe not a big thing is a huge thing.
Yeah.
And celebrate that with them.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Oh, this was good.
Yeah, this was good.
Yeah.
I feel good.
Yeah. And I'm glad we talked about this, because I know for a while you've kind of been like, ooh, like, I'm a caregiver podcast co-host. Am I allowed to do this if I'm not like in it? So I hope that this
this is
firmly grounded you in like, oh yeah, you're in it, friend. Sorry. But you're still wearing the backpack. You're still part of the club. You still have lots of perspective to give us.
Yeah.
And Well, so I think that, like, as always, we'll have a support group about this. And I think that, maybe you're listening and you're like, well, have never had a quiet season yet, so I don't need this support. But I think it will be interesting to hear different people's perspectives on this. Right. And so watch for that. There will be a link about how to register for the support group so that we can keep talking about this important topic.
All right.
Yeah. All right. All right. Well, I'm going to get ready for snowpocalypse. You enjoy your flowers, and
I will.
I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to In Sickness. Find us online at insickness.care or on Instagram at insicknesspodcast. You can send your questions and comments to insicknesspodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or fellow caregiver, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and take care.